This is a continuation of Chapter 4. We are on page 82. What you need to know on this page is what a keystone species is. A keystone species has a large influence on an ecosystem. So a popular example of a keystone species is sea otters and their influence on kelp forests. Sea otters, they eat sea urchins, but if there are no more sea otters present, then sea urchins population grows rapidly, and then they eat the kelp. So this is the community with the sea otter and without. So they have a large influence on that community or ecosystem. Another example is wolves in Yellowstone. Wolves were present in Yellowstone, and then they started, because of a disease, they started dying out. And so that had a large population on their prey, on on moose, and also on the riparian or the river ecosystem in Yellowstone. So ecosystems, if they're able to remain stable after disruption, then that means that they have resistance. If they're able to bounce back readily, then they have resilience. So after Hurricane Harvey, the coastline ecosystems, the coastal prairies, they were able to bounce back and actually thrive because of all the sediment redistribution and the nutrient redistribution around the coast. So that those ecosystems around the Gulf, Corpus Christi, Galveston, were very resilient. Something that's not in your book, but that you need to know is an indicator species, and that's an organism that serves as a measure of environmental conditions. An example of an indicator species are amphibians. They have very permeable skin, so if the amphibian population in a river has gone down or their behavior is changing, then that may be because of water pollution. So they indicate how well they're doing and indicates how well the ecosystem is doing or the environment is doing. And lichen, they filter out air, and so they're a great indicator of how the air pollution is. And there are many, many other indicator species. There's grizzly bears, snow owls are indicator species. Population bottleneck is something that's also not in your book, but it is an event that is going to drastically reduce the size of a population, and it's going to cause a loss of genetic diversity. So that can be like volcanic eruption or a natural disaster. If you have many organisms that are dying, then there's going to be less of that variation, and a gene or a variation of that gene may be lost. Okay, succession. So severe disruptions can trigger succession. Similar events that would happen here. Succession would start, and there's two types of succession. There's primary succession, where there's no fertile soil or seeds present, and some examples are volcanic eruptions. Lava flow is going to cover any soil, and so it's just rock that's present, no soil. And then when a glacier recedes, it uncovers bare rock. So that's what you're starting with primary succession. Pioneer species come first in the ecosystem. They help break down rock and form soil. Lichen, again, is one of the first species. Lichens secrete a chemical that breaks down rock and helps erode that rock. When lichen dies, its nutrients contribute to soil formation. Mosses come in second, and then after that there'll be grasses. One thing to note here is that when these organisms move in, then they can adapt over time and evolve to that particular environment and ecosystem. And so evolution can occur with these species in order to adapt to that particular place. Secondary succession is when there is still some fertile soil or seeds left. So that happens after a fire, a flood, anytime we're logging. And grasses or herbs come first. So here, lichen and moss may still be there, but they're not the first organisms to move in. Okay. So we're going to skip over this right here, and we're going to go to page 86. So here, no pond succession. It's a little bit different than land succession, pond succession. A pond will eventually, it may eventually fill in. So it's a little bit different. So this paragraph right here. And then also know what a climax community is. Climax community is a community that is the result of succession. It's the end of succession. That community is not going to change really after it's reached a climax community. And then regeneration is when that ecosystem has returned to a healthy ecosystem. So when succession occurs, the community that's resulting, that climax community, may not be the same as it was before. So some, like if a top predator is not able to come back, like the snowy owl, if we log trees and the snowy owl disappears, and when that community reaches a climax community again, that snowy owl may have died out, it may not come back, and that's going to have that's going to affect the rest of the ecosystem, especially if it was a keystone species. So that's a phase or regime shift. And then a no analog community is what has happened as a result of human disturbances, and they're communities that would not occur in the natural world. So know what invasive species is. Invasive species are very, very important in ecology. Sometimes they're called alien species, sometimes they're exotic or introduced, but they are brought somewhere new. They have no natural predators or disease in that new land that they're in, and they outcompete native species for resources. And the spread of invasive species has been sped up through global trade. So one of the examples that's talked about in this book are zebra mussels or quagga mussels, but there are also Burmese pythons were invasive in southern Florida. People would have them as pets, and then once Hurricane Andrew came, a lot of those pets got displaced, brought into the wild, and then they have their own population here, and they're kind of destroying the land. There are other examples like carp. So know this figure and caption about the zebra and quagga mussels in North America. The impacts of on zebra and quagga mussels, they came from Eastern Europe. So what they do is they can clog intake pipes of power plants, and that costs a lot of money to fix. So that's economic loss on our end. They will kill phytoplankton and zooplankton because they actually filter in those. They filter water. And then plankton-eating fish will die. But bottom-feeding fish and benthic invertebrates, they are okay in that environment. Native mussels and clams are going to be outcompeted. They're going to die. And then aquatic plants, since they are filtering the water, they're going to get more sunlight. So it's actually good for aquatic plants. And this is where the mussels are in North America, and they came in through this river into the Great Lakes, and they've spread through a lot of eastern North America, and the quagga mussels have even reached the west coast, and so have zebra actually. They're a huge issue. This case study is about succession after Mount St. Helens. We're going to skip on over to page 90. You have to know what degradation means. This is just a word that I'm going to use pretty often in class, and that is the decline of an environment or deterioration. And that can be by depletion of resources like soil, water, air, erosion, pollution, or extinction of species. Know what ecological restoration is. And that is just restoring an environment, an ecosystem back to how it was before maybe we disturbed it. And there's a lot of these projects going on around us on the Gulf Coast. There's one right now going on in Sheldon Lake, which is close to us, and then again many along the coast restoring coastal prairies and that marshland. And here are some examples of restoration: removing invasive garlic mustard, and they're physically removing that, restoring prairies in Chicago or outside of Chicago, and removing those Burmese pythons from the Florida Everglades. Those were that invasive species I was talking about. All right, so that is it for now.